Hello, it's the 1st of June 2022, the first day of the €9 ticket, and a lot of people have been predicting chaos with overcrowded buses and trains, so I'm going to take a little trip into Frankfurt just to see if any of that is true for my €9 ticket report. Okay, I feel that was unnecessary. So, here's the plan. I take the bus from my village to the next village, where I get a train to Hanau that connects to the S-Bahn to Frankfurt. And then I get an RE train back from Frankfurt. This means I get to try out an important commuter route and a train that is marketed to tourists. Can I just say that these are some of the most spookily well-behaved children I've ever encountered on a train. Yes, there was a strangely quiet party of school children on the train, but parties of school children aren't that unusual on public transport in Germany. This train is extremely local. It does nothing more than connect this valley to the rest of the world. Well, I have to say that this train at least isn't overcrowded. If anything, it's underused. But then I didn't expect any different of a small rural branch line. We're coming into Karl. Now, normally my ticket is only valid as far as Karl, and usually if I want to go into Frankfurt I have to buy an extra ticket. But for the next 3 months, my ticket will be valid for all local public transport anywhere in Germany for just €9 a month, and so, at least in theory, I don't need to buy another ticket. Hooray! We are running about 4 minutes late, but that shouldn't matter because we actually have a few minutes in Karl so we can make up for lost time. Unless there is a delay on the main line, which can happen, that may delay this train even further. It'll be interesting to see what happens. This is the weak point of this railway. At Karl am Main, it joins the main Frankfurt to Nuremberg line, which is incredibly busy. If an intercity express happens to be running late, this slow train has to let it pass before continuing. Okay, so I was a bit wrong about that. We haven't made up for lost time after all. We're still running about 4 or 5 minutes late. That's actually slightly unusual for this line, but oh well, you have to take the rough with the smooth.
Nächste Station, Hanau Hauptbahnhof. Ausstieg in Fahrtrichtung rechts.
So I got into Hanau a few minutes late, where I wanted to change to the S-Bahn. And just to be clear, all the public transport I'm taking in this video can be used with the €9 ticket. Hanau Hauptbahnhof, by the way, is undergoing some much-needed modernisation work, which, as you can see, isn't quite finished yet. And of course, this change means walking from one end of the station all the way to the other, but transfers on the rail network aren't usually quite such a marathon. And I don't have to check on a timetable to see where I need to go because all S-Bahn trains go from the same platform. And Hanau is a terminus for the S-Bahn, so all the S-Bahn trains go in the same direction. Well, I must have just missed a train because this one isn't going for almost another half hour, so I've got all that time to kill. Yeah, there are actually other trains I could take into Frankfurt. I don't have to wait for the S-Bahn, but that's what I'm doing because I want to for the purposes of this video. Besides, I actually want to get to Konstablerwache, and yeah, normally the S-Bahn is the quickest way of doing that. I'm not used to having to wait quite this long for the S-Bahn. Great stuff. This is the Rhein-Main S-Bahn and is absolutely critical for commuters in the Frankfurt area. But it has a weakness. All lines go through the same tunnel in central Frankfurt, and this means that if one train is slightly late, it can cause delays throughout the whole system. But even so, it really shouldn't just randomly grind to a halt. And so this train got into Frankfurt about 10 minutes late, by which time it was not exactly full, which is, if anything, unusual, as it's normally packed with urban commuters. At Konstablerwache, I changed to the U-Bahn to get me to the heart of historic Frankfurt. Surely this train will be packed with excited tourists. Clearly not, then. It's an interesting thing about Frankfurt. I often find that the S-Bahn is very busy, the U-Bahn much less so.
Well, so far I have to say that it feels like a pretty normal weekday in Frankfurt. So what I'm going to do now is to take the tram to the Hauptbahnhof and see if there's any chaos there.
I would call this tram pretty full, but not badly overcrowded. Pretty normal for central Frankfurt, I'd say. So, how about the Hauptbahnhof, one of the most important hubs of the German rail network? Well, as one of the most important hubs of the German rail network, it's always busy. And with most pandemic restrictions now lifted, more people are travelling now anyway, even without the €9 ticket. This actually looks pretty normal to me. But let's have a look at the departure board and see just how much chaos there is at the moment. Oh, it's not that bad actually.
Well, I have to say that it doesn't seem any more chaotic than normal, but let's see what it's like down on the S-Bahn platforms.
And yes, we're back on the main S-Bahn tunnel, the backbone of Frankfurt's public transport system. And this, in my experience, is also pretty normal.
Well, so far everything seems quite normal. I don't see any sign of the chaos that was predicted, but this is only the first day and it is a Wednesday. The weekend is coming up and also the school holidays in Germany, which are due soon. So we'll see how it develops. So I'm going to get some lunch because I'm really very hungry, and then I'm going to get an RE train back homewards and we'll see what that's like.
I won't reveal exactly where I ate, but just let me say that when you're used to eating out in the countryside, eating out in the city tends to be expensively underwhelming for some reason. But never mind that. Rather than go to the Hauptbahnhof, I took the U-Bahn to Frankfurt's other major station, the Südbahnhof. All trains that call at Hanau, except for the S-Bahn, go through here, so why should I fight my way through the crowds at the Hauptbahnhof?
So the original plan was to get a regional express train to Karl and take the local train back home from there. And I just watched a train that terminates at Hanau leave this station, and I saw that my train was going to be late. Okay, fair enough, no problem. I would take it to Aschaffenburg and get the bus back there. No sooner had I thought that than the display changed to show that my train has been cancelled. Yeah. Great.
For many reasons that I may explain in a future video, Frankfurt is a notorious bottleneck, although I've never had an RE train be suddenly cancelled like this. I knew I was going to miss my connection at Hanau, and so instead took the train all the way to Aschaffenburg to get the bus home. Why? Because it was a straight choice between waiting 40 minutes at Hanau and waiting 40 minutes at Aschaffenburg to get home at exactly the same time, and honestly, Aschaffenburg wins every time.
So basically there was a fair amount of chaos towards the end of my trip, but I don't think that had anything to do with the €9 ticket. I think it was just more the Deutsche Bahn was having a bad day, and the problem is that the Deutsche Bahn seems to have frequent bad days, although I must say that my experience isn't usually quite as bad as it was today. But this is one of the problems with the €9 ticket and the idea of encouraging more people to use public transport. If you have a day like today, it's actually more likely to be off-putting than anything else. So it remains to be seen what the end result will be, but I think I kind of agree with the states that while this isn't a bad idea on principle, we really need a lot more investment in the network to really get it up to scratch.
And this is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the whole thing. I think, and I realise that a lot of Germans passionately disagree with me, that public transportation in Germany is actually pretty good. But pretty good isn't perfect, and people's expectations are very high. When those expectations aren't met, people are not going to be impressed enough to abandon their cars. And if their experience is bad enough, they'll never use public transport ever again. Now, I actually could have got home an hour earlier than I did because there were other alternatives available, but for the purposes of this video, I specifically wanted to ride the Main-Spessart line. Now, I happen to be quite familiar with public transport in this area, so if something does happen, I can be very flexible. My experience of this trip was irritating, but not horrible. But if this was my first time on the trains, I would have found it a very confusing and frustrating day. Just how confusing it can be was brought home to me when I had to reassure a group of people who'd obviously never used the S-Bahn before that just because it says Wiesbaden on the front of the train doesn't mean that Wiesbaden is the only place it stops at. But I didn't see any problems that were obviously caused by the €9 ticket. According to our local newspaper, trains and stations in the area were busy, but not overcrowded. So basically, not a disaster. But if my experience is typical, then I don't think it's going to encourage more people to use public transport.
Terminating at Hanau go out. Okay, well,